Dr. Lyrelei Voss pulled her crystalline fingers across the ancient data core, feeling the faint vibrations that told her it still held secrets. The archive world of Kepler 442c stretched endlessly around her, its vast halls filled with the collected knowledge of 1,000 dead civilizations. She had spent her entire adult life here, cataloging artifacts and translating fragments of lost languages. The Zephyrians had always been peaceful. Their delicate, translucent bodies housed minds that could touch each other across vast distances. They shared thoughts as easily as humans might share breath. War was something their species had evolved beyond countless millennia ago. Violence was inefficient, barbaric, and ultimately pointless when minds could simply reach out and understand each other. Lyrelei activated the data core with a gentle pulse of telepathic energy. Ancient symbols flickered to life in the air above it, rotating slowly as the translation algorithms worked to decode the dead language. She had discovered this particular core 3 cycles ago, buried deep in the ruins of a civilization that had called itself the Corvani Empire. Most of their records spoke of trade agreements, scientific discoveries, and cultural exchanges. Standard historical documentation. But this core was different. As the symbols resolved into readable text, Lyrelei found herself staring at what appeared to be military records, battle reports, casualty lists, descriptions of something the Corvani had called the human scourge. She read the first passage aloud, her voice echoing in the empty hall. Day 47 of the siege. The humans continue their assault despite losing 60% of their forces. Logic suggests they should retreat and regroup, but they show no signs of rational thought. They attack our positions even when outnumbered 10-1. Lyrelei paused, her large eyes blinking slowly. The translation must be wrong. No species could survive evolution with such self-destructive tendencies. She ran the passage through the algorithms again, but the result remained the same. Another entry made her stand up from her workstation. The human commander died today, shot through the chest by our energy weapons. We assumed this would end their resistance. Instead, it made them fight harder. They carried his body into battle and used it as a banner. We do not understand this behavior. She walked to the window overlooking the endless archives. Other Zephyrians moved through the halls below, their movements graceful and purposeful. They communicated in soft whispers of shared thought, their minds linked in the eternal conversation that had guided their species for millions of years. The idea of fighting each other was as foreign to them as breathing underwater. But these records spoke of creatures that seemed to thrive on conflict. Beings called humans who fought not just for resources or territory, but for abstract concepts the Corvani translators could barely understand. Honor, freedom, duty. The words appeared throughout the documents, always surrounded by commentary from confused Corvani observers trying to make sense of human behavior. One passage particularly disturbed her. We offered the human settlement complete surrender terms. They could keep their homes, their families, their way of life. All we asked was acknowledgement of Corvani authority. They refused. Their leader told our negotiator that they would rather die free than live as slaves. We thought this was a negotiation tactic. We were wrong. Lyrelei returned to her workstation and continued reading. The records painted a picture of a species unlike anything in known galactic history. Humans who would charge enemy positions with primitive weapons when their advanced technology failed. Soldiers who fought on after losing limbs, who protected their wounded even when retreat was the logical choice. Warriors who seemed to feel pain but ignored it in ways that baffled Corvani scientists. The most incredible entry came near the end of the archive. Human reinforcements arrived today. We had killed their advance force completely. Every single warrior died in the assault. Logic dictated that any species learning of such total losses would avoid this sector. Instead, more humans came, many more. They brought images of their dead comrades and spoke words we cannot translate. Our linguistic experts believe the closest meaning is remember them. They attacked tonight. She called up the final entry in the sequence. The humans have broken our defensive lines. Our surrender offers continue to be ignored. They fight room to room, building to building, showing no concern for their own casualties. Our commander has ordered full evacuation of the system. We do not understand these creatures and we cannot defeat them. Let others learn from our failure, never fight humans on their terms. Lyrelei sat back in her chair, her mind reeling. The academic in her recognized this as an incredible historical find. But the rational part of her mind rejected what she was reading. These accounts had to be mythology, stories created to explain some natural disaster or political collapse. No species could function with such chaotic, self-destructive behavior patterns. She composed a message to her colleague, Dr. Theron Kale, who specialized in mythological analysis. Theron, I have discovered what appears to be an elaborate mythology from the Corvani Empire. They created fictional warriors called humans, who seem to exist solely to fight and die in impossible circumstances. The psychological purpose of these myths is unclear, but they appear designed to justify military failures. The attention to detail is remarkable, but the behavior described is clearly impossible from an evolutionary standpoint. As she sent the message, Lyrelai felt a small shiver of unease. The Corvani records were remarkably detailed for mythology. They included tactical analyses, biological observations, and even attempts to understand human psychology. Most civilizations that created warrior myths focused on the glory and honor of battle. These records read more like scientific studies of an incomprehensible phenomenon, but that was impossible. If such creatures had existed, someone would have encountered them again. The galaxy was vast, but not so vast that an entire species of warriors could remain hidden, and besides, any species with such aggressive tendencies would have either destroyed themselves in endless wars or conquered the galaxy entirely. Lyrelai began the long process of cataloging and filing the data core. It would join thousands of other artifacts in the archive, another piece of a lost civilization's imagination. Scholars would study it, analyze it, and ultimately dismiss it as what it obviously was, an elaborate fiction created by a long-dead species. She had no way of knowing that 3 sectors away, a Drakmori war fleet was preparing for its next conquest. The reptilian commanders studied their star charts and spoke in hushed tones about ancient enemies they had thought extinct. Enemies whose very existence had driven the Drakmori to build the largest military empire the galaxy had ever seen. And in the depths of space, on a small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star, 7 billion humans went about their daily lives, completely unaware that their greatest test was approaching. The myths, it turned out, were about to become very real indeed. The warning came too late. Lyrelai was examining another artifact when the first reports reached the archive. Distant monitoring stations had detected massive energy signatures moving through hyperspace toward the Zephyrian colonies. Ships, hundreds of them, approaching at speeds that suggested military intent. Dr. Theron Kale materialized beside her workstation, his crystalline features flickering with concern. "The Defense Council is meeting in emergency session," he said, his thoughts touching hers directly. "These ships are not responding to diplomatic communications. The Zephyrian Defense Force was a proud organization, but one built for exploration and scientific research rather than warfare. Their vessels carried advanced sensors, powerful engines, and enough firepower to clear asteroid fields or deter pirates. They had never faced a real military threat. The first battle lasted 6 minutes. Lyrelai watched the feeds from the outer colonies with growing horror. The attacking ships emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, massive angular vessels that bristled with weapons she could not identify. They ignored all attempts at communication and opened fire immediately. Zephyrian defense platforms, built to protect against random meteor strikes and cosmic debris, crumbled under concentrated bombardment that turned metal into expanding clouds of superheated gas. "Who are they?" Theron asked, his mental voice tight with fear. The answer came 3 hours later when the first diplomatic message arrived. The transmission showed a reptilian creature with scarred hide and predatory eyes. When it spoke, its voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "I am War Commander Seth of the Drakmori hegemony. Your territories now fall under Imperial control. Surrender your governments and submit to processing. Resistance will result in complete extermination." The Zephyrian Council attempted to respond with standard diplomatic protocols. They offered to negotiate, to discuss terms, to find a peaceful solution that would benefit both species. They transmitted their entire cultural database to demonstrate their peaceful intentions and scientific achievements. The Drakmori response was, "Orbital bombardment of the Council." Chambers.news poured in from across Zephyrian space. Colony after colony fell as the reptilian fleet moved with ruthless efficiency. Their tactics were simple and effective. They arrived in overwhelming force, demanded immediate surrender, and destroyed anything that resisted. Cities that submitted were occupied. Cities that hesitated were reduced to radioactive craters. Lyrelei found herself part of a growing refugee stream as the outer worlds evacuated. Transport ships packed with civilians jumped from system to system, always one step ahead of the advancing Drakmori fleet. She brought what artifacts she could carry, but most of the archive's treasures had to be left behind. In the cramped confines of the refugee ship Starward Reach, she listened to survivors' accounts. The stories painted a picture of an enemy unlike anything the Zephyrians had ever imagined. The Drakmori were not just conquerors, they were specialists in warfare on a scale that peaceful minds could barely comprehend. "They herded us into the central plaza," said Karen Vax, a survivor from the colony on Hadrian's world. "Then they sorted us. Scientists and engineers to the left, everyone else to the right." Her mental voice carried images too terrible for words. The Drakmori, it seemed, had turned conquest into a precise science. They had detailed files on Zephyrian society, knew exactly which individuals were valuable and which were expendable. They moved through captured cities with mechanical efficiency, cataloging resources and processing populations according to predetermined criteria. But it was the casual conversations between Drakmori soldiers that revealed the most disturbing information. Intercepted communications spoke of ancient protocols and contingency plans, references to the old enemy and extinction. Procedures appeared throughout their military chatter. Lyrelei was analyzing these fragments when she discovered something that made her crystalline heart skip a beat. A Drakmori tactical officer discussing deployment strategies had mentioned specific combat doctrines. "Remember, if we encounter any signs of human technology or human resistance cells, Protocol Omega is immediately activated. No exceptions, humans, the same mythical warriors from the Corvani records." She dove deeper into the intercepted communications, using her skills as a xenoarchaeologist to piece together fragments and partial transmissions. A picture began to emerge that defied everything she thought she knew about galactic history. The Drakmori hegemony, according to their own military records, had been born from a single catastrophic war. Centuries ago, their home system had been invaded by creatures they described in terms that matched the Corvani records exactly: bipedal mammals with impossible endurance and incomprehensible tactical thinking. Warriors who fought with a ferocity that bordered on insanity. The Drakmori had barely survived that conflict. Their entire civilization had been rebuilt around a single principle: never again would they face such an enemy unprepared. Every ship, every weapon, every tactical doctrine had been designed with one purpose in mind. If the humans ever returned, the Drakmori would be ready. But according to their intelligence reports, the humans had vanished from the galaxy. No trace of them had been found in over 300 years. The Drakmori High Command had eventually concluded that the species had either destroyed itself in civil wars or retreated to some unknown region of space. This knowledge had not reduced their military buildup. If anything, it had intensified it. The Drakmori expansion across the galaxy was not random conquest. It was a systematic campaign to build an empire large enough to face the human threat if it ever re-emerged. Lyrelei realized with growing horror that the Zephyrians had become victims of ancient fears. The Drakmori were not fighting them. They were practicing for a war that might never come against an enemy that might not even exist anymore. The refugee fleet reached the inner colonies just as those worlds came under attack. The Drakmori had committed their full fleet to this campaign, surrounding every inhabited system with overwhelming force. There would be no escape, no negotiation, no mercy. In the depths of space, as Zephyrian civilization crumbled around her, Lyrelei made a desperate decision. She accessed the archive's emergency transmission system and began broadcasting a message on every frequency she could reach. If the humans still existed somewhere in the vast galaxy, perhaps they would hear her call for help. The message was simple: coordinates, casualty reports, and a desperate plea for aid from creatures she still half believed were mythological. As she sent the transmission into the void, Lyrelei wondered if she was going insane from stress and trauma. But as the Drakmori fleets closed in around the last free Zephyrian worlds, sanity seemed less important than hope. Even if that hope rested on legends that had walked out of ancient myths, Unknown to Lyrelai, her message was racing across the galaxy toward a small blue planet where the descendants of those ancient warriors were about to learn that their reputation had preceded them across the stars. The age of hiding was about to end. Admiral Sarah Chen stood before the holographic display in the command center of Luna Station, studying the transmission that had arrived 3 hours ago. The message was fragmented, transmitted on primitive radio frequencies that suggested the senders were either very far away or using outdated technology. "Computer, play the transmission again," she ordered. The speakers crackled with static before a voice emerged, speaking in what the translation computers had identified as an unknown alien language. The universal translator had managed to piece together key phrases: massive invasion fleet, systematic extermination, and most importantly, human warriors from ancient records. "Sir," said Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez, approaching with a datapad, "Intelligence has finished their analysis. The coordinates in the message point to a sector approximately 80 light-years from our nearest colony. Long-range sensors detect massive energy signatures consistent with a large-scale military conflict." Chen nodded slowly. Humanity had spread across dozens of star systems in the 4 centuries since achieving faster-than-light travel, but they had done so carefully. The species had learned hard lessons from their violent past. The colony wars of the 22nd century had nearly destroyed human civilization, and the survivors had sworn never to repeat those mistakes, but they had also sworn never to be helpless again. "What do we know about the aliens sending this message?" Chen asked. "They call themselves Zephyrians, sir. Based on their transmission patterns and the linguistic analysis, they appear to be a peaceful, scientifically advanced species. No military signatures in their technology. The attackers are identified as the Drakmori hegemony, a militant empire that has apparently conquered most of their territory." Chen turned to study the tactical display. Red markers showed the estimated positions of Drakmori forces, while blue dots indicated the last known locations of Zephyrian refugees. The situation looked hopeless for the peaceful aliens. "Sir," Rodriguez continued, "there's something else. The message specifically mentions ancient records about human warriors. It seems these Zephyrians discovered historical accounts of human military actions. They're asking for help based on legends." The Admiral felt a chill run down her spine. Humanity had been exploring the galaxy for centuries, but they had always been careful to avoid contact with hostile civilizations. The early exploration fleets had standing orders to retreat rather than fight, to observe rather than engage. But there had been exceptions. "Pull up the classified files on the Corvani contact incident," she ordered. The hologram shifted to show records from nearly 300 years ago. Captain James Harrison's exploration fleet had encountered the Corvani Empire during what was supposed to be a peaceful survey mission. The Corvani had decided that humans would make excellent slaves and had attempted to capture Harrison's ships. They had learned, in the most brutal way possible, that humans did not make good slaves. "The Corvani records were supposed to be destroyed," Chen murmured, reading through the incident reports. "How did these Zephyrians get access to them?" "Unknown, sir. But if the Drakmori know about those records, it might explain their expansion pattern. They could be building an empire specifically to fight humanity." Chen closed her eyes and thought about the weight of decision. Humanity in 2387 was vastly different from the species that had fought the colony wars. They had learned to channel their aggressive instincts into exploration, scientific advancement, and careful expansion. Most humans lived peaceful lives on comfortable worlds, pursuing art, science, and philosophy. But underneath that peaceful exterior, the old instincts remained. Every human citizen received basic military training. Every colony maintained defense forces, and deep in the classified archives, the Terran Defense Force maintained detailed plans for scenarios that most civilians hoped would never occur. "Contact the Joint Chiefs," Chen ordered. "Emergency session in 1 hour. And Rodriguez? Pull up everything we have on asymmetric warfare, guerrilla tactics, and rapid deployment strategies." The meeting that followed would be debated by historians for generations. The Terran Council faced a choice that would define humanity's role in the galaxy. Senator Williams argued for caution, pointing out that they had no obligation to unknown aliens and that intervention could expose Earth to retaliation. General Morrison took the opposite position. "Sir, The intelligence reports suggest this Drakmori hegemony controls approximately 20% of the known galaxy. If they're building their forces to fight humanity specifically, then this conflict is coming to us whether we want it or not. Better to face them now while they're engaged elsewhere, than wait for them to finish consolidating their conquests. Admiral Chen presented the tactical analysis. The Drakmori have overwhelming numerical superiority and advanced technology. Direct naval engagement would be suicide, but the transmission suggests the Zephyrians still have refugee fleets and hidden bases. If we can coordinate with them, we might be able to turn this into the kind of conflict where our advantages matter more than theirs. President Martinez made the decision that would change galactic history. Approved. But this is not a full-scale war. Admiral Chen, you'll take a task force to the Zephyrian sector. Your mission is assessment and limited engagement. If the situation is as bad as these reports suggest, you're authorized to provide tactical assistance to the refugees. The assembly of Task Force Prometheus took 18 days. Chen selected ships and crews carefully, choosing vessels built for speed and flexibility rather than raw firepower. The heavy cruiser, Indomitable, served as the flagship, supported by 4 destroyers, 2 assault carriers, and a dozen support vessels. But the real strength of the task force lay in its marine contingent. 2,000 volunteers from the Colonial Defense Corps, specialists in boarding actions, urban warfare, and behind enemy lines operations. They carried equipment designed for fighting in hostile environments against unknown enemies, and they trained constantly during the 6-week journey to Zephyrian space. Colonel Marcus Webb briefed his Marines during the final approach. Remember, we know almost nothing about these Drakmori except that they're large, reptilian, and apparently very good at conventional warfare. Our advantages are flexibility, adaptability, and the fact that they've probably never faced human tactics before. As the task force dropped out of hyperspace on the edge of the Zephyrian home system, sensors immediately detected massive energy signatures. The Drakmori were still there, maintaining a blockade around the planet with ships that dwarfed anything in the human fleet. "Sir," reported Lieutenant Singh from the sensor station, "I'm reading approximately 200 Drakmori vessels in this system alone. Confirmed hostiles are launching fighters to intercept us." Chen studied the tactical display with grim satisfaction. The enemy was reacting exactly as expected, moving to engage what they saw as a small, isolated fleet. They had no idea that they were about to encounter an enemy whose reputation had been built in the fires of conflicts they couldn't imagine. "All ships. This is Admiral Chen. Execute Plan Omega. Show them what human warriors actually look like." The battle for Zephyrian space was about to begin, and the galaxy would never be the same. The first thing Lyrelei noticed about the human ships was how small they were. She floated in the observation deck of the refugee vessel, Star's Hope, watching through the reinforced viewport as strange new contacts appeared on the sensor screens. After weeks of running from massive Drakmori battleships, the arriving vessels looked almost fragile by comparison. "They're not Drakmori," announced Captain Vel Thorne, his mental voice carrying relief mixed with confusion. "Unknown configuration, unknown energy signatures. They're broadcasting on standard diplomatic frequencies." The transmission that followed changed everything Lyrelei thought she knew about the universe. The image that appeared on the communication screen showed a bipedal creature with pale skin, dark hair, and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. When it spoke, the sounds came from its mouth rather than its mind, forcing the universal translators to work frantically to decode the meaning. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Force. We received your distress call and are here to assist. Please identify yourself and report on the tactical situation." Lyrelei felt her crystalline heart stop. Terran, the ancient word for Earth dwellers. The legendary humans had not only survived, they had come in response to her desperate message. Captain Thorne recovered first. "Admiral Chen, this is Captain Vel Thorne of the Zephyrian Refugee Fleet. We are honored by your presence, though I confess we thought your species was mythological. The Drakmori have conquered our entire civilization. We have perhaps 3 million survivors scattered across a dozen hidden fleets. What followed was the most difficult first contact in galactic history. Humans, it turned out, communicated primarily through sound waves and facial expressions, making telepathic contact impossible. The Zephyrians had to rely on primitive audio-visual equipment to translate concepts that their species normally shared mind to mind. But when Admiral Chen requested a complete tactical briefing, Lyrelei found herself serving as translator and historical expert. She explained how she had discovered the ancient Corvani records, how those myths had led to her desperate transmission, and what they had learned about Drakmori capabilities. They have approximately 2,000 ships in this sector alone, she reported, her translated voice carrying across the communication link. Their technology is superior to ours in every category. They use overwhelming force and show no interest in negotiation or mercy. Admiral Chen listened intently, asking questions that revealed a mind trained for warfare in ways that peaceful Zephyrians could barely comprehend. She wanted to know about Drakmori command structures, supply lines, communication protocols, and tactical doctrines. Information that the refugees had never thought to collect. "Admiral," Captain Thorne said carefully, "while we are grateful for any assistance, I must point out that your task force numbers only 16 ships. The Drakmori blockade force has over 200 vessels." The human's expression did something that the translators struggled to interpret. Later, Lyrelei would learn it was called a smile. "Captain, you're thinking like someone who fights fair. We don't." The first battle began 6 hours later when Drakmori patrol ships discovered the human fleet. Lyrelei watched from the refugee vessel's sensor station as the engagement unfolded, trying to understand what she was seeing. The Drakmori approached in perfect formation, massive ships advancing with the confidence of predators who had never encountered serious resistance. Their tactics were textbook perfect. Overwhelming firepower concentrated on the largest enemy vessels, followed by methodical destruction of remaining forces. The humans did not follow the textbook. Instead of forming a battle line to meet the enemy advance, the human ships scattered in seemingly random directions. They used the asteroid field at the system's edge for cover, popping out to fire precise volleys before disappearing again. They targeted specific systems rather than trying to destroy ships outright, leaving Drakmori vessels crippled but intact. "What are they doing?" asked Dr. Theron, his mental voice tight with confusion. "This is not how space battles are fought." Lyrelei was beginning to understand. "They're not trying to win a space battle. They're creating chaos," the human Marines confirmed her theory. While the fleet action drew Drakmori attention, small assault craft crept through the debris field toward the enemy capital ships. What happened next defied every principle of civilized warfare that Lyrelei knew. The humans boarded enemy vessels, not through docking procedures or surrender negotiations, but by cutting through armor plating with fusion torches and fighting their way through corridors filled with hostile aliens. The sensor readings showed dozens of small human teams moving through Drakmori ships, planting explosives and capturing key positions. "This is impossible," Captain Thorne whispered. "No rational being would attempt to board an enemy vessel in the middle of a battle." But the humans were not only attempting it, they were succeeding. Drakmori commanders trained for ship-to-ship combat had no protocols for dealing with enemies who materialized inside their vessels and fought room by room with primitive kinetic weapons and explosive charges. The turning point came when the human Marines captured the Drakmori command ship. Instead of destroying it, they used its communication systems to broadcast false orders throughout the enemy fleet. Confused Drakmori captains found themselves receiving contradictory commands, while their sensors showed impossible tactical situations. By the time the battle ended, the humans had destroyed or captured 40% of the Drakmori force while losing only 2 of their own vessels. More importantly, they had demonstrated something that changed the nature of the entire conflict. The Drakmori could be beaten. Admiral Chen's next communication request was directed specifically at Lyrelei. The human woman studied her through the video link with eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. "Dr. Voss, I understand you're a specialist in ancient civilizations. I need you to help me understand something. These Drakmori seem to know a lot about human capabilities, but they're fighting us like we're just another conventional enemy. That suggests they've learned about us secondhand, probably from the same records you discovered." Lyrelei nodded, still struggling to process what she had witnessed. The Corvani documents described human tactics in detail, but they focused primarily on ground combat and boarding actions. The Drakmori may have studied those records without understanding how humans would adapt those tactics to space warfare. Good. That gives us an advantage, but only temporarily. They'll learn and adapt quickly, which means we need to change the rules of this conflict entirely. What Admiral Chen proposed next would have been considered insane by any military theorist in the galaxy. Instead of trying to match the Drakmori in conventional ship-to-ship combat, she wanted to turn the war into something they couldn't understand or counter. "We're going to teach your people how to fight," she said simply. "Not how to win space battles, but how to make the enemy's victory impossible. Guerrilla warfare, sabotage, resistance operations. We're going to turn every Drakmori-occupied system into a battlefield where their advantages don't matter." Lyrelai looked around at the refugee fleet, filled with scientists, artists, philosophers, and civilians who had never held a weapon in their lives. The idea of turning them into warriors seemed impossible. But as she watched Admiral Chen's tactical briefings over the following days, she began to understand that the humans weren't trying to turn Zephyrians into human-style fighters. They were teaching them how to use their own unique capabilities in ways that could hurt an occupying army. Telepathic coordination could make sabotage teams impossible to intercept. Scientific knowledge could be weaponized in ways that military minds would never expect. And most importantly, a species that had never known war could learn to fight with a desperation that would surprise enemies who thought they understood defeat. The transformation was beginning, and Lyrelai found herself at the center of it. The scholar who had thought human warriors were myths was about to become a bridge between two species learning to fight a war unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The real battle for Zephyrian space was just beginning. 6 months after first contact, Lyrelai stood in the command center of a converted Zephyrian research vessel, coordinating resistance operations across 3 star systems. The shy academic who had once dismissed human warriors as mythology now served as Admiral Chen's primary liaison with the Zephyrian underground. The war had transformed beyond anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. The Drakmori, expecting a quick suppression of scattered refugees, instead found themselves facing an enemy that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. Supply convoys disappeared without trace. Occupation forces woke to find their equipment sabotaged by invisible hands. Communication networks carried false information that sent entire battle groups to empty coordinates. "Report from the Hadrian sector," announced Dr. Theron, his mental voice now carrying the crisp efficiency of a military briefer. "The power grid serving the primary Drakmori base has been disrupted. Estimated downtime, 72 hours. The transformation of the Zephyrians had been remarkable to witness. These beings who had evolved beyond violence proved surprisingly adept at a different kind of warfare entirely. Their telepathic abilities allowed coordination that no conventional army could match. Their scientific minds found ways to weaponize everyday technology. That left Drakmori engineers baffled. But it was the combination of human tactical thinking with Zephyrian capabilities that created something truly unprecedented. "Admiral Chen," Lyrelai said, turning to address the human commander through their secure communication link. "The resistance cells on Kepler Prime are ready to implement Operation Mindbridge. We've identified the locations of all major Drakmori communication hubs in the capital." Admiral Chen's image flickered on the main screen, transmitted from the human task force that now operated throughout Drakmori space, with an effectiveness that bordered on supernatural. The humans had taken their own tactical doctrines and adapted them for an entirely new kind of conflict. "Confirmed, Dr. Voss. Human Special Forces teams are in position to support the operation. Remember, the goal is not just to disrupt their communications, but to inject false information that will make them question everything they think they know about resistance strength and locations." The battle for Kepler Prime exemplified everything the war had become. Instead of massive fleets clashing in space, small teams of mixed human and Zephyrian operatives infiltrated Drakmori installations using techniques that no military manual had ever described. Zephyrian scientists, guided by human engineers, had developed stealth technology that bent light and energy around their ships in ways that made detection nearly impossible. Human marines linked with Zephyrian telepaths could coordinate assault operations with a precision that made conventional tactical communications look primitive. The Drakmori found themselves fighting an enemy that attacked their assumptions about warfare itself. "Sir," reported Colonel Webb from the surface of Kepler Prime, "the resistance teams have successfully accessed the central command complex. The Drakmori never expected attackers who could share information telepathically while remaining physically separated. Their security protocols assume that coordination requires detectable communication. Lyrelai watched the operation unfold through shared mental links with the Zephyrian operatives. She could feel their thoughts, their fear mixed with determination as they moved through enemy installations that had been considered impregnable. Human training had taught them how to fight, but it was their own unique nature that made victory possible. The breakthrough came when they discovered the full scope of Drakmori strategic planning. Hidden in the captured computers were documents that revealed the true purpose of their galactic expansion. The Drakmori Empire was not just another conquering civilization. It was a fortress built around a single paralyzing fear. "Admiral," Lyrelai said, studying the translated files, "you need to see this. The Drakmori High Command has been planning for a human resurgence for over 3 centuries. Every ship, every tactic, every strategic doctrine has been designed around defeating what they call the human threat model." Admiral Chen's expression grew thoughtful as she reviewed the intelligence. They've been preparing to fight the humans they remember from 300 years ago. Colonial-era humans with limited technology and no understanding of galactic warfare. Exactly, but their preparations have made them inflexible. They've built an empire specifically designed to counter human tactics from the Corvani era. But they have no response to what humans have become, especially when working with allies they never imagined. The implications were staggering. The Drakmori military machine that had conquered half the galaxy was optimized for fighting an enemy that no longer existed. Faced with the reality of modern humans working alongside telepathic allies, their carefully constructed strategies began to crumble. The final phase of the war began when Admiral Chen made a decision that violated every principle of conventional military thinking. Instead of trying to liberate Zephyrian space system by system, she decided to attack the Drakmori Empire's foundation directly. "We're going to their home system," she announced during a joint human-Zephyrian strategy session. "Not to conquer it, but to prove that they're not invincible. If we can demonstrate that even their most protected worlds are vulnerable, the psychological impact will shatter their empire." The assault on the Drakmori homeworld became the stuff of legend. A combined fleet of human vessels and modified Zephyrian ships, using hybrid technologies that neither species could have developed alone, penetrated the most heavily defended system in the galaxy. But the real victory was not military. It was psychological. When the Drakmori High Command realized that their ultimate fortress could be breached by enemies they thought they understood, the rigid command structure that held their empire together began to fracture. Lyrelai found herself aboard Admiral Chen's flagship as they approached the Drakmori homeworld. The sight that greeted them would have been impossible 6 months earlier. Drakmori resistance groups, inspired by Zephyrian broadcasts and human tactical support, rising against their own government. "It's not about conquest," Admiral Chen explained as they watched Drakmori ships surrender rather than fight. "It's about proving that the universe doesn't have to work the way they think it does. Fear made them build this empire. Now fear is tearing it apart." The aftermath reshaped galactic civilization. The Drakmori Empire fragmented into dozens of smaller states, many of which sought peaceful relations with their former victims. Worlds that had been conquered joined the growing alliance between humans and Zephyrians, creating something unprecedented, a galactic community based on cooperation rather than domination. Lyrelai returned to the archive, but her work had changed completely. Instead of cataloging dead civilizations, she now helped document the birth of something new. The careful records she maintained would ensure that future scholars understood how 2 species, different in every way imaginable, had found strength in their differences. The final entry in her report read, "The human warriors were not myths. They were promises. Promises that no matter how dark the galaxy became, somewhere there would be those willing to fight for something better, and when the time came, they would not fight alone." Standing in the rebuilt archive surrounded by artifacts from 1,000 civilizations, Lyrelai looked up at the stars and smiled. The universe was vast and dangerous, filled with predators and empires that sought to impose their will on others. But now everyone knew that somewhere among those stars, human warriors stood ready to prove that the strong did not always win, and that sometimes the myths people told their children were not just stories, but prophecies waiting for their time to come true. The age of galactic peace had begun, built on the foundation of those willing to fight for it.